the house before he made it back from his office, so he had no way to track how or what she was doing. Which was only fair. She deserved her privacy, and he didn't deserve a glimpse of what he'd willingly relinquished. Despite those drawn shades, though, he could still see her, and not just when she left the house for groceries or work. Whenever his salt-seared eyes closed, she greeted him with her small, glowing smile. She arched to meet the slow slide of his hand over her soft, soft skin. She cried in his arms. She held him in his own grief, and she stroked his hair in comfort, in gratitude, in affection. Yeah, he still saw her all the time. The only woman he'd ever loved in almost 4 decades of existence. The woman whose love for him he'd held carefully cupped in his palm, only to turn his hand over and spread his fingers wide. Despite Matthew's agreement to leave Athena, Johnny hadn't spoken to him since their argument. So maybe that relationship was irrevocably damaged, too. Which would be ironic, and probably well-deserved. His younger brother was quiet this morning, and not just with Matthew. As they sat in the employee lounge and Ivana shared necessary information for the upcoming day, Johnny stared blankly down at his notebook, his shoulders rounded, his pen unmoving. Maybe he was distracted by his plans to lure Athena into his arms once more. Or maybe he'd launched those plans with his typical impatience and already been rejected because Matthew hadn't lied to his brother. Athena wouldn't take Johnny back. Athena wouldn't take either of them back. "Do you agree, Matthew?" Ivana asked, in reference to something. "Yes," he said. Because whatever. It didn't matter. If they needed him to take an extra on-call shift or visit the hospital nursery or assist a CPNP with a particular patient, fine. He had no reason to go home. Athena wasn't waiting for him there, and he could access her behind his own eyelids whenever he wanted. Ivana was watching him now, her scrutiny sharp. That didn't matter either. Atop the wholesale agony of his memories from yesterday, he barely noticed the additional sting. Over a sleepless, ink-black night, he'd replayed the entire disastrous confrontation. He'd listened to himself acquiesce to his brother's demands, to his brother's needs, over and over. And right before dawn, he'd tried to nail down the reasons he'd done it. In part, it must have been simple reflex. Matthew had become Johnny's true father a long, long time ago, and a father's instincts twitched beneath his skin. My kid is unhappy. I need to fix it however I can, immediately. Those instincts, combined with long, long experience in sacrificing himself for his brother's happiness and giving Johnny whatever he wanted, must have guided Matthew through his impenetrable labyrinth of emotions to the nearest exit, the most familiar one. The easiest one, although not easiest for him. Easiest for Johnny, Matthew's son, in fact, if not in blood. The pale morning light had begun to wash through the windows of the staff lounge, illuminating Johnny's face without pity. For the first time, Matthew noticed crinkles at the corners of his brother's eyes. Crow's feet, born of tiredness, yes, and maybe grief, too, but also age. His brother wasn't a child anymore, not even a young adult. Johnny was over 30 years old. At 30, Matthew had already raised a kid old enough to legally drink. And while that wasn't right, it had never been right, Matthew had deserved a childhood too. And they'd both deserved real parents. The contrast in what the two brothers had done by that age, what had been expected of them and what they expected of themselves, was startling. If a stranger were to study the Vine brothers now, would they say Johnny was the one in need of extra support? For every moment of Johnny's life, he'd had at least one family member dedicated to his comfort and happiness. Now he was a grown adult, and an intelligent one, He owned a house, free and clear. He'd earned a medical degree and was well on his way to becoming a creditable pediatrician, especially if his post-Hawaii commitment to his work proved permanent. He'd gathered a large, supportive circle of friends who invited him to Halloween parties and New Year's Eve get-togethers, and Johnny gladly joined them whenever his brother wasn't available. He'd never lacked for girlfriends or friends offering benefits, and he'd been engaged once already. That engagement had ended by his own choice, not his fiancée's. Then there was Matthew. Before Athena, he'd never had a girlfriend. Never had a lover. Most people liked him well enough, but apart from Ivana and Carl, who would actually consider him a true friend or confidant? Until Athena, he'd been so fucking lonely. All the time. Disconnected and lost, even though he'd lived in this town his entire life, known and gotten along with everyone, and never questioned his life path or moved out of his childhood home. She'd blown into Harlot's Bay like a cyclone and upended everything he thought he knew, only to settle herself comfortably in the bleak, barren corners of his disarranged life, filling them with joy and purpose and affection. But that was done now. He'd flipped and flexed his hand. He'd watched her love drop to the bricks and shatter. If she cried, he couldn't comfort her. If she laughed, he couldn't hear it. If she pursued new adventures, he couldn't accompany her. If she wrecked on the rocks again, he couldn't offer his help as she pieced herself back together. And he still didn't have one fucking photo of her that was his alone. A chair screeched, and he dimly wondered whose. Then he was standing, walking out the employee lounge door, out the practice's back exit, and out from under the weight of a dozen shocked, concerned stares. He didn't take this particular path daily, or even weekly, but it was familiar. One right turn, and then another. 4 blocks of walking, away from the town center and toward more residential areas. Through the creaking gate, which he'd treat with WD-40 the next time he came. Over the grass, brown with the desolation of winter. There were no flowers at the grave, either fresh or fake. Adrian wouldn't have known what to do with plants, apart from eating them. That kid had shoved anything and everything into his mouth, especially when a new tooth was about to poke through his poor, inflamed gums. Sometimes, stupid as it felt, Matthew brought one of Adrian's teething toys with him when he visited. A ring of plastic keys, or a nubby circle, just the right size for chewing without any risk of choking. Other times he brought his brother's favorite stuffed elephant, its neck floppy from Adrian's little hands and pudgy arms wrapped tight. He didn't leave those mementos of his brother's too short life at the grave, but they were offerings nevertheless. Today, Matthew brought nothing but himself. When he sat, the chill of the damp ground immediately seeped into his bones. Didn't matter. He couldn't stay long. There were patients to see, duties to fulfill, routines to follow. He might have broken his own heart, but life plodded on regardless. God, he hated visiting here in the winter. His brother would be so goddamn cold, and Matthew couldn't do a single thing about it. A coat, thick and familiar, covered his shoulders, and someone dropped down next to him. Ivana. The bottoms of her sharp heels studded with clumps of dirt and grass. She maneuvered him like a doll until he was wearing his wool coat, then stretched out her legs. "Due to my racing stripes, I have the reflexes and speed of a cheetah," she said, her gaze trained on his brother's gravestone. "Good thing, too, since you took off like a broody rocket." "Sorry." Aching inside and out, he gathered his legs beneath him. "I'll come back." She rested a hand on his shoulder, and he subsided. "You're covered." Akio's taking your first 2 appointments, and Johnny's squeezing in a couple of mine, which I confirmed right before I sprinted out the door. He nodded, unable to meet her eyes. I apologize for the disruption. Skip the apologies and tell me what's going on, Matthew. She scooted closer until they sat shoulder to shoulder. I've never seen you like this before. And we've been friends for a really, really fucking long time, so that's saying something. His next breath shuddered. I can't. If he talked right now, he'd cry. And if he let himself disintegrate entirely, he couldn't get up and be the in-control authority figure his patients, their parents, and his employees needed. I'm in no hurry, she said imperturbably. We can stay here as long as you need. For a while, they sat silently, the warmth of his coat and her nearness beating back some of the chill. Then he told her everything, because he knew his friend. She was stubborn as blazes, and she'd outweighed him. Hell, if he didn't surrender before nightfall, she'd simply call Jackie and have a tent and sleeping bag brought to the damn cemetery. After he was done, they sat silently again, waiting until his tears had dried. Then she sighed and turned to look at him. Matthew, I may need you to explain everything again. I'm having trouble understanding why you dump Athena for Johnny's sake, even knowing she'd never take him back. Dump. He'd always loathed using that terrible word in reference to Athena, but it was apt. Again. Because he'd tossed her aside like a bit of refuse, hadn't he? Just like his brother. I think... He pressed 2 fingers to the spot where his head throbbed worst. I raised Johnny like a father would. And I think I got too used to giving him anything he wanted to make up for what he was missing. What you were both missing, Ivana corrected. You both lost a brother. You both lost your parents, even if they were technically still around. She never let him get away with anything, and he loved her for it. Always had. Yes, you're right. I lost my brother too. I lost my parents. I lost Granny. Her headstone was only a row away, and she got fresh flowers once a month. No teething toys. Although, to be honest, she'd probably appreciate her dentures more than daisies. Johnny is the only family I have left. And that was the final straw, wasn't it? The last, decisive burden laid upon his straining back, breaking his will to fight for Athena. I was terrified, Ivana. Panicked. Almost unable to form words through the fear. I wanted to tell him, no. I love Athena and want to stay with her, but I was so afraid that... He couldn't even say it out loud. You'd lose him as well. When he nodded, she hiked up her knees and pinned him with her clear, brown stare. Matthew, do you genuinely think your brother would cut you out of his life forever if you were with Athena? I mean, he may be the only blood family you have left, but you're also the only blood family he has left. It was a good question. Too bad he didn't have a good answer. Maybe not, he said after a minute. But if I refused him, I knew things would change between us. Possibly for good. Ivana spread her hands. Is that really such a bad thing? Do you really want to keep your relationship exactly the way it is now? You, forever the responsible older brother. Johnny, the feckless kid who needs guidance and protection, no matter what it costs you. Isn't that doing you a disservice? Isn't that doing him a disservice? Those were the same questions he'd begun asking himself in the employee lounge. What did Johnny actually need from Matthew now? What did he deserve? What, if anything, did Matthew deserve from Johnny? He didn't know. Right now, he was only certain about two things. He and his brother had both failed Athena, one after the other. And Johnny would eventually be okay without her, but Matthew wouldn't. She won't forgive me. And I don't blame her. His voice was so quiet he barely heard it himself. I threw her love away, just like my brother did, and she listened to me do it. Then he'd let her walk off without trying to stop her, without even telling her one last time how irrevocably she'd stolen his heart. If he came up to her now, told her he'd changed his mind and refused to step aside for his brother and tried to make his case for resuming their relationship, she'd fucking eviscerate him. Definitely verbally, possibly physically. He'd made his own bed. The sheets might be disgustingly filthy, but he still had to climb between them and lie there. You're probably right about Athena. At this point, I imagine she's had enough of the Vine brothers, which is a feeling I know all too well. Trust me on that. Ivana's manicured finger poked him in the ribs, and he yelped out a protest. But Matthew, you started raising an infant at 8 years old, yet somehow managed to get yourself through medical school and a pediatric residency. Then you turned around and did the same thing for your brother. You're smart, hardworking, and incredibly stubborn. This time, the pressure of her shoulder against his wasn't a comforting nudge. It was a shove. So if you love her, why are you giving up without a fight? She shoved against him again, even harder, and he toppled over onto his side. Yes, Athena will probably refuse to take you back. Does that mean you shouldn't even try? When she put it like that, not trying sounded stupid. Absurd, even. Because what did he honestly have to lose? His pride? He'd never had any when it came to Athena. His brother? Well, that was a trickier issue. Johnny already kind of hated him right now, and Matthew's decision to pursue Athena would only make matters worse. You genuinely think Johnny would forgive me? He asked tentatively. Ivana lifted a shoulder. Maybe not for a while, but eventually. If you let Athena leave, though, there'll be no eventually with her. The two of you will be done. Forever. It was true that Johnny had never been much of a grudge holder, and Matthew really was his only remaining family. And, damn it, yes, it was past time for their relationship to change. Even Matthew could admit that now. You're right. He eyed Ivana cautiously as he raised himself back to a seated position. Of course I'm right. His best friend buffed her shiny nails against her fancy peacock blue coat. It's time for you to grovel, Matthew. Grovel like no man has groveled before outside of Sadie Brazen's novels. Just FYI, Victoria said Brazen's guppy dude removed a guppy fin to prove his guppy regret and guppy devotion after wronging his fated non-guppy mate. At Matthew's look of horror, she shrugged. It grew back. And when it did, for some reason, he got an extra guppy penis, too. Of course he did. Damn it, Brazen. My limbs won't regenerate, Matthew said slowly. So, Ivana stood and swatted dead grass off her wool-clad rear. Get creative. Just grovel, Vine. Guppy style. Got it, he told her, then heaved himself to his own feet. When in doubt, ask myself WWGMD. What would Guppy Man do? Limb removal was a hard no, but almost everything else was up for debate. For the first time since Athena's departure from his office, a sense of purpose and possibility filled some of the desolate hollowness she'd left behind. And as he and Ivana walked arm in arm back to the practice, he began making plans. Guppy style. 22. Athena's for sale signs kept disappearing. It was weird. She'd never had any issues with theft before, and neither had the neighbors she asked. But 3 damn days in a row, she'd trooped over to Fawn's office in the afternoon, procured another sign from the increasingly exasperated real estate agent, and thumped it deep into the little patch of grass in front of the Spite House. Only to wake up the next morning to a signless yard. She'd think the universe was telling her not to leave Harlot's Bay, but the universe had also presented her with both fine brothers, so the universe could get bent. In less than a week, the disappearing signs would become Fawn's issue, because Athena was packing up her belongings for the second time in less than 6 months and preparing to peace out of Harlot's Bay. She didn't need reminders of Matthew everywhere she went, and she didn't need all her best friends so closely tied to him. There was no escaping him in this town, so she was escaping from this town. For the last few days, she'd been crying a lot, but she didn't feel depressed, per se. These weren't tears of hopeless despair. They were simply grief. If she could get the hell out of Harlot's Bay, away from Matthew, her state of mind would improve. Probably. Almost definitely. Although she was really going to miss the friends she'd made, despite their associations with him. And Matthew himself. He was everywhere around her, but he was everywhere inside her, too. In a prime example of towering irony, when misery began to drown her and she had ugly, self-loathing thoughts, his was the voice she heard in her head, defending her. Arguing quietly, sincerely, that she was being far too hard on herself, deeming her a woman lost in seeking new worlds, fractured, but not a failure. Never, ever a failure. Maybe that was the saddest thing of all. He truly loved her. There was no faking that, and Matthew was a terrible liar anyway. He just didn't love her quite enough. Not as much as she loved him. She couldn't live next door to a constant reminder of that, so she had to go. Missing for sale sign or no missing for sale sign. She could only hope the lack of him outside her head would eventually banish him from inside its overstuffed confines, too. The evening of the 3rd replaced sign, the next odd thing happened. Food arrived to her front door. Lots of it. By food, she meant potatoes. A freaking avalanche of potatoes. She received pulled pork-topped tater tots from the diner, peanut sweet potato stew from the Gambian Cafe 3 blocks away, an exquisite little mini Palms Anna, its thin slices arrayed like a flower from the tea room, crisp samosas with a savory potato pea filling from the town's best Indian restaurant, poutine, rosti, even a fresh loaf of potato bread from Carl. She could potentially eat nothing but potato products for the next week. It was the sort of thing her parents might do, but they convincingly claimed no knowledge of the potato tsunami, as did Victoria, Jackie, and Bez when she texted them. Baffled, she sat down for dinner and ate her approximate body weight in delicious tubers. It was a volume of spuds unmatched in her personal potato consumption history, which she considered a true feat. The next morning, she woke to yet another missing sign, and a brief note slipped through her mail slot. Generic paper, Times New Roman font, unsigned. The message read, "Open your window tonight, 8 p.m. P.S. Check Reddit." What in the world? Well, she knew for certain the note wasn't from Matthew, because that man wouldn't know Reddit from a wheel of cheese. When she discreetly asked him about the site a few weeks ago, curious as to whether he'd seen her scathing "Am I the asshole?" post, he'd frowned at her and said he'd heard of Reddit somewhere. Wasn't it a literacy program targeting teens? So, yeah, no way it was him. However, One of the newest AITA posts told the tale of a man, 39M, who'd broken off a new relationship with the woman he loved, 37F, because his brother wanted her as well. He'd realized his terrible error in judgment and was miserable without her, but he was worried attempts to reconcile with her, despite the encouragement of his friends, would be a dick move. Her words, not his. He was evidently much more refined than Athena, so he wrote hurtful and unwelcome instead of a dick move. His closing statement? I'd like to convince her of my devotion before she leaves town forever, but maybe it's selfish of me to demand her time and attention after I hurt her so badly through my own cowardice and bad judgment. AITA for trying to grovel my way back into her heart. The ages matched. The situations matched. The earnest humility in the writer's words matched Matthew's demeanor. And someone had slid a note through her mail slot pointing her toward Reddit on the very day the post appeared. On the other hand, teen literacy program. On the other hand, despite his lack of fluency with social media sites, he was more than capable of consulting Professor Google, and she had mentioned Reddit to him before. Well, there was nothing for it. She'd need to open her window at 8 o'clock that evening to find out what the actual fuck was going on. Just to assuage her curiosity, obviously, since the outcome didn't really matter. Even if Matthew truly had orchestrated all the recent oddities in her life and done so out of heartfelt regret and love, the two of them were over. Through. Finito, kaput, donezo. Maybe if she used enough synonyms, she could force her misguided heart to believe it. Coastal Maryland in early January wasn't exactly the North Pole, but it wasn't Hawaii either. Opening her window for mysterious reasons based on an anonymous note seemed like a remarkably terrible idea now that Athena was sitting in her unlit library nook with frigid air swirling around her and sneaking beneath her thick terrycloth bathrobe. The message hadn't specified which window to open, but she wasn't offering ground floor access to a possible stalker. The third floor seemed safer. Although, to be fair, at least one person had previously entered her home through this very window, despite its daunting height. Whatever. She was here. For what reason, she hoped to discover shortly. Matthew's windows all had their shades drawn, except in his empty office. But, that was odd. After plopping down in her comfy reading chair, she'd removed her glasses to scrub her face nervously. Now she slid them back on because if she didn't know better, she'd have said Matthew had a sign in his kitchen window. A for sale sign, to be exact. One defaced in thick black letters, which were painted directly over poor Fawn's face and business logo. The sign now read, "For sale. Everything I have. Now and forever. $0." In his dining room window, there was a different message. For sale. Everything I am and ever will be. $0. She clapped her hand over her mouth to stifle a sob as she read the final sign, placed in his bedroom window. For sale. One broken heart. No need to buy. It's always been yours. I'm so sorry. The letters on each sign were so squished and small, it was damn hard to read the messages. Her crying didn't help much either. Squinting and sniffling, she leaned forward to make sure she'd gotten everything right, because if she had, a loudly clearing throat made her jump in her chair, and she jerked her head toward the source of the racket. Matthew's office, still dark. But while she'd been studying the signs and sniveling, the window had been cracked open and a laptop positioned on the sill, facing her, its speakers apparently operating at full volume. Matthew was holding the laptop in place, easily visible. No longer hiding. His stare compulsively roamed over her face, her body, as if he could swallow her whole through sight alone. She bit her lip, uncertain how to respond, and trained her eyes on the laptop instead of him. Wait, was that Carl's voice booming from the speakers?
Yes, I'm sure it's fucking recording,
he grumped ear-splittingly.
You think I'm gonna fuck this up, asshole?
Matthew's voice made its bone-dry, equally deafening debut.
I apologize for questioning your mastery of recording technology. After all, you're such an enormous enthusiast of selfies and other means by which to preserve your image and words for posterity. Fuck you, Vine. At least I knew what Reddit was, dude. I'll bet you think a meme is some motherfucker trapped in a stupid invisible box.
Heroically, Matthew managed to ignore that and get the project back on track.
So, you'll know how to cut out this part and any other problematic bits and splice everything together once we're done?
A long pause.
Sure. And you're certain what we wrote sounds like a Sadie Brazen story?
A longer pause.
Sure. Then let's do this.
Matthew drew a deep breath, then spoke more slowly, with pristine enunciation.
Down to Pluck, an erotic monster romance by Sadie Brazen.
She snorted loudly, unable to contain her amusement. Across the alleyway, a smidgen of the anxiety furrowing his brow seemed to ease. Not that she was watching him, except out of the corner of her eye.
Once there was a chicken man hybrid named Matthew.
He began.
A sexy chicken man hybrid named Matthew packing plenty of poultry penis.
Carl corrected.
Stick to the script, asshole. Once there was a sexy chicken man hybrid named Matthew, packing plenty of poultry goodness.
Matthew began again.
He had ripped abs, two appendages, and feathers perfectly positioned for tickling a lover's fancy. Chicken man is about right.
Carl grunted.
You suck, dude.
Fine, Matthew snapped, finally out of patience.
Once there was a sexy chicken man hybrid named Matthew packing plenty of poultry penis. He had ripped abs, two cocks, and feathers perfectly positioned for tickling a lover's clit. Happy now?
Carl's snicker matched Athena's.
Yup.
Thus began the most bizarre and hilarious half hour of her life to date. And she'd once watched Mono's The Hands of Fate during her first and only foray into edibles. According to friends, she'd spent the entire evening shouting, "Manos means hands! It's really hands! The hands of fate! Holy shit!" Haltingly, through various cranky interruptions by Carl, Matthew spun the heartwarming and also vagina-warming tale of a half-silky, half-human man who fell in love with a fully human woman, remarkably similar in appearance to Athena. Her name was Athena, because subtlety apparently wasn't the men's greatest writing strength. Chicken Man Matthew and thinly fictionalized Athena had lots of improbable, enthusiastic sex, the narration of which was clearly killing human Matthew, only to find themselves confronted with Chicken Man Matthew's Chicken Man brother, John. Carl hooted.
Oh, that right there is some fucking discretion, Vine. If Johnny ever hears this, no way he'll ever figure out who that John motherfucker is.
After that point, Athena stopped laughing because Matthew didn't sugarcoat what had happened in the office.
He saw the hurt in her eyes, but let her walk away.
His voice had turned raw and cracked, and not simply from the strain of narration.
He sagged against the coop's desk, desolate beyond speech. The moment she disappeared from sight, his feathers began to fall softly to the floor, one by one, like the tears he shed. The emptiness of his wing arms chilled him from the inside out, and he searched his hollow chicken soul for answers. Why had he broken his chicken heart and her heart too? Why had he set her aside for his chicken man brother, even knowing John and Athena weren't fated chicken mates? Then, using his tortured tale of poultry and pain and true love, Matthew told her what she already knew. He'd been his brother's indulgent father figure for over 30 years, and he was too used to giving Johnny whatever he wanted. But even more than that, Matthew was a man who'd lost almost everyone he loved as a young boy, and he couldn't stand the thought of losing Johnny too. The last true member of his blood family. The last remaining tie to his lost childhood and his lost brother. He'd panicked, Matthew concluded somberly. And in his panic, he made a grievous mistake. There was no doubting his sincerity. Every word fairly dripped with sorrow and desperate remorse and, yes, love. He wanted to earn Athena's forgiveness and regain her trust. He wanted to tell her the truth, that he would never, ever let her go again, that she could keep exploring new worlds for decades to come, and he'd remain by her side the entire time, his wing arm firmly tucked in hers. That any time she got lost, he'd peck at whatever was blocking her view until she found her way once more. That she didn't need to be certain about anything but his love. Which was the moment she began crying for the 1,000th time that day. He continued. And most of all, he wanted to ask her to be his chicken mate forever, because spending every last breath of his life with her would be the greatest joy and honor a chicken man like him could ever imagine. But Athena was a human woman who'd been hurt badly by chicken men in her past. And he didn't see how she could ever forgive him. He refused to let her disappear from the coop without at least trying, though. Well, her first tissue was soaked. On to another, and probably another after that. One of Matthew's chicken friends told him to emulate the groveling of guppy men, he added, sounding slightly aggrieved. But it turned out guppy-style groveling wasn't feasible because his chicken man limbs wouldn't regrow after being cleavered off. And also he owned neither an underseas guppy estate nor jewel-encrusted scuba gear. So chicken man-style groveling, Matthew-style groveling, would have to suffice. He sighed. So he groveled as best he could in his awkward chicken man way, and then he had to wait to find out what would happen next. Because he couldn't force or argue Athena into forgiving him, no matter how much he loved her, or how very sorry he was for hurting her. Whatever she chose to do next, he'd accept as his chicken fate, even if it meant her fleeing the coop and leaving him behind for good. The narration paused there as his breath hitched. If she did leave, he said, slowly, hoarsely. Matthew wanted her to do so with an unburdened heart, knowing she'd done nothing wrong. The fault was all his, and even if he spent forever without her, he would always be grateful she still existed somewhere in the world, and that he'd once had the privilege to be loved by her. Then, silence. You really need to write a fucking ending, man, Carl interjected. Matthew's response drifted from the laptop speakers in a frayed whisper. I can't. It's not my decision. Athena buried her sniffle in a tissue. Damn it.
He wasn't going to let her hold even the tiniest grudge, was he? Through tonight's bizarre display, not to mention the Reddit post and last night's spud flood, he'd more than proven himself. He loved her enough to fight his fears and fight for her, to try to stop her from walking away, but honor her choice if she did, to keep her forever if she'd accept his apology. How could she stay angry at him? Sadly enough, she wouldn't be able to use this misstep as leverage in future arguments either. The reminder of what he'd done would hurt him far too much. In any case, she'd inevitably make mistakes of her own in their relationship. Maybe less grievous ones, but they'd add up, and he'd forgive her readily, each and every time. Because that was who Dr. Matthew Vine III was. He'd already been crowned the champion of head. Like hell, she'd let him hog the champion of forgiveness title, too. After one last hiccup, Athena accepted the inevitable. Matthew's chicken heart was as soft as a silky's feathers. Someone needed to protect it, and that someone might as well be his human mate, because she was much more vicious than he could ever hope to be. She blew her nose, loudly. Then she produced her phone from her bathrobe pocket and consulted Professor Google on a key point. When she looked up, Matthew was still staring directly at her, his beautiful eyes full of stricken, hopeless love. An adult male chicken is either a cock or a rooster, you jackass. She slipped her cell back in her pocket, stood, and set her fists on her hips. Sadie Brazen would never call her hero a chicken man when she could call him a cock man instead. Duh. Oh. He frowned even harder. I probably should have asked Hill for assistance. She flicked her wrist in dismissal. Nah, it was more entertaining this way. Athena. His voice turned ragged. I am so very sorry. Can you ever forgive me? Ah, the crucial question. 2 days ago, she'd have offered an entirely different response, but now... I suppose so. She heaved a dramatic sigh. Which means you'd better come over here, meet me in my bedroom, and start earning it. His mouth dropped open, but he didn't seem to be breathing. Like, at all. She threw her hands in the air, exasperated. What are you waiting for, Dr. Matthew Vine III? You still have a key. He about-faced and fled his office without another word. Knowing she didn't have long before his arrival, she hurried to her bedroom and dropped her terry-cloth robe on the floor. Less than a minute later, his footsteps raced up her stairs and he burst into her room, breathless and wet-cheeked and overjoyed. Before another heartbeat passed, he'd tumbled into her open arms, then into her welcoming bed, precisely where he belonged. Even a chicken man couldn't have flown to her side any faster. Put that beak to good use, baby, she murmured against his mouth, grinning. I am, in fact, down to pluck. He laughed, his eyes still bright with relieved tears. A champion's work is never done. Then he moved down her body, eased open her thighs, and blew her clucking mind. Giddy with joy, exhaustion, and anxiety, Matthew showed up at Johnny's doorstep the next morning and wouldn't leave until his brother appeared, which Johnny finally did after 3 presses of the doorbell. He hadn't talked to Matthew in days, not even at work. So when he finally emerged from the house, Matthew expected shouting, obscenities, maybe a punch or a shove. Instead, Johnny opened the door and wearily leaned against the frame. For a minute, the 2 brothers simply looked at one another. Then Johnny pushed off the doorframe, nudged Matthew's arms wide, and huddled against his older brother like a child. His forehead rested on Matthew's shoulder, and his arms wrapped painfully tight around Matthew's waist. Stunned, Matthew hugged Johnny close, rocking him a little. When was the last time his brother had wanted comfort from him like this? 20 years ago? Longer than that?
"I'm sorry,"
Johnny whispered thickly.
"I'm so sorry, Maddie. I shouldn't have asked you to leave Athena."
After giving his brother a fierce squeeze, Matthew forced himself to say the words that might end the embrace, that might end their relationship, full stop.
"I'm sorry too, but you need to know that she and I are together. If she's willing, I intend to marry her as soon as possible."
Tensely, he waited for an explosion that never came.
"Yeah, I got that,"
Johnny said, then snorted wetly against Matthew's shirt.
"I do live next door, you know. A-plus job, groveling chicken man."
Matthew sagged in relief, unable to fathom his continued good fortune. Also unable to fathom the evident loudness of his laptop speakers and the fact that he, of all people, had co-written such filthy, yet inept, interspecies erotic romance. It had served its purpose, though. Athena had forgiven him, against all odds. His next impossible task, salvaging his relationship with his brother.
"If you can't be around me for a while, I'll understand."
Matthew pressed a hard kiss to the crown of Johnny's head.
"But please believe me when I say I never wanted to hurt you. And I'll always want my baby brother in my life. As much contact as you're willing to accept, we'll have." "Listen, Maddie."
Johnny sucked in a hitching breath, then let it out slowly.
"I'd already planned to come over later today to apologize, but also talk to you about other stuff."
That sounded ominous. But maybe Matthew was simply a worrywart, as Athena had alleged a time or two.
"In Hawaii, I decided I wanted Athena back, and for that to happen, I needed to be the kind of man who would deserve her,"
his brother said.
"So I started trying to be better, more responsible, especially at work, but everywhere."
Ah. That explained the post-honeymoon transformation.
"Right after you and I argued the other day, I waited for Athena and made my case to her. She responded with a resounding fuck no."
To his credit, Johnny sounded wryly amused as well as pained.
"That's when I finally got it, Maddie. I loved her, I still do. But I fucked her over, and there's no getting past that. Which is why I need to get my shit together, Athena or no Athena, so I don't do the same thing to the next woman I love."
Matthew's anxiety unwound another fraction. If his brother was already thinking in those terms, of falling in love with someone else, then he'd be fine, sooner or later. As opposed to Matthew, who'd been resigned to remaining alone and lovelorn for the rest of his Athena-less existence. This was the right choice. Hard and hurtful, but not wrong. All humor evaporated from Johnny's voice.
"Then I saw how empty you looked the morning after we argued. Just dead inside. I watched you break down for the first time in our lives and run from your own practice, your own employees, because you were hurting so much. And I was so ashamed, Maddie. So fucking ashamed. And the moment you left, everything else fell into place too. Why you'd seemed so happy the last couple of months. How selfish I'd been to ask you to give her up. Especially after everything you've done for me my entire life. What I need to do now, for both of our sakes."
Now his brother was crying again. Not over Athena. Over him.
"I have to start making my own decisions, Maddie,"
Johnny whispered between hiccups.
"I've been leaning too heavily on you for too long, and it's not good for either of us. You need to have your own life, and I need to choose whichever way forward will make me happiest, no matter how you might feel about it."
Matthew was crying too, he realized. from pride in the man his baby brother had become, and pride in himself for raising that man. From ineffable sadness as he listened to Johnny take his first faltering step away from Matthew, even as they still held one another. Johnny cleared his throat.
I think I want to be a pediatric sports specialist. I'm going to give it a little more time before I make any moves, but if I decide to sub-specialize, I'll have to leave Strumpet Square Pediatrics for my fellowship program, and you'll have to find a new doctor. I'm sorry.
It all made sense. It really did. But still, Matthew's heart beat out a repeated, grief-stricken no. He took a moment to gather himself, because this was what a parent did. You had to love a child with every ounce of your being, care for them and protect them, and try your damnedest to help them become what they were meant to be, rather than what you might have expected or wanted from them. Try your damnedest to help them become an adult, capable of navigating the world in pursuit of their own happiness, independently of you. Only to watch them become an adult navigating the world in pursuit of their own happiness, independently of you. It was a devil's bargain, being a parent, bound to end in pain, no matter what. Nevertheless, he'd honor his end of the deal. He'd do what was best for his child, because letting go was maybe the last great responsibility of parenthood. He spoke carefully.
My being with Athena. I know it'll be hard, but I hate the thought of you leaving because of that.
Johnny shook his head.
I would want this with or without Athena. I promise, bro.
Matthew nodded. An acknowledgement. A surrender. Okay, then. Okay. He could do this. He could let go without burdening his brother with his own grief. Athena was in his life now, and she would help him make his way through it.
Where did you run off to the other morning anyway?
Johnny let his head rest more heavily on Matthew's shoulder.
Ivana wouldn't say. I visited Adrian. I haven't been there for years.
Johnny clung tight for another moment, then stepped away from Matthew.
Want to go now?
Matthew's arms fell to his sides, empty. He swallowed hard.
Sure.
He let his brother lead the way to the cemetery. When they arrived, they sat in the brown, damp grass, side by side.
Tell me about Adrian,
Johnny said.
What did he like to eat? Was he walking yet?
So Matthew shared stories and details no one else remembered, not even their parents, and answered Johnny's questions. After an hour or so, the brothers ran out of words, but neither of them got up. They simply kept each other company. They kept Adrian company. Finally, though, Johnny stirred and straightened.
Why don't we split the maintenance fees for Adrian's grave from now on?
Yes. Matthew ruffled his brother's hair.
I'd like that. Quit it, asshole.
With an unconvincing scowl, Johnny ducked away from him.
I meant to tell you earlier, I can handle all of my student loans, too, if you'd like.
God, Matthew's brain was too tired for math.
We can talk about that later. Find some calculators and figure out what's fair for both of us.
Calculators, Johnny snorted.
Old-timer? Whippersnapper?
Johnny clambered to his feet with a groan.
Shit, I'm not feeling all that young myself right now. Anyway, I need to head out, Maddie. I owe Ivana a long overdue apology, and I need to tell her about my possible departure.
When Matthew opened his mouth to offer himself as an intermediary, Johnny raised a hand.
It's my responsibility. Not yours, but thank you.
Craning his neck, Matthew looked up at him.
See you soon?
It was a question. A plea.
Tonight or tomorrow?
Johnny reached down and gave him a noogie, ignoring Matthew's squawked protests.
There's no getting rid of me, bro. Too bad for you.
Then Johnny left, and Matthew sat alone in the silent, cold graveyard. He thought about both his brothers, infants in his arms, small and trusting, and let himself weep. After a while, Athena dropped down beside him with a thump and a little whimper at the chill of the grass. "Your brother thought you could use some company," she said, and drew his head into her lap. They stayed that way, her fingers sliding through his hair for a long time. When he sat up, she offered him one of her small, genuine smiles, her hazel eyes full of tender sympathy. Her lips beneath his were soft and cool, and he lingered to warm them, to warm himself. He stroked her bangs to the side, away from her glasses, and her hair was so silky it almost slipped through his fingers. At the last possible moment, he latched onto the end of a strand and tugged gently.
"Let's go back,"
he told her.
"I'll make you tea."
She studied him so carefully, so lovingly he almost cried again. "You're ready?"
"I'm ready."
He stood, offered his hand, and helped her up. And together, they made their way home. Epilogue. 5 years later. Felicity didn't even flinch when Matthew gave her the flu shot. The 10-year-old might refuse to let anyone else deal with her vaccinations. Not the CPNPs, not Ivana, not even Keeley, the third doctor in their practice, whom everyone loved. But she never raised a fuss when he was the one wielding a needle. He probably shouldn't take such pleasure in that. Someday she'd need to accept shots from someone other than him. But in the meantime, her trust trickled through him like warm, sweet syrup.
"Take care of yourself, Felicity,"
he said once they were done, and he watched her clamber down from the exam table. No signs of illness, injury, or developmental issues. Good. She flicked him a jaunty wave on her way out the door. "You too, Dr. Vine. See you at the Halloween festival tonight." He smothered an involuntary wince. Yes, unfortunately, he'd be there. Athena was emceeing the window decoration contest, and although she'd told him to stay home, he wouldn't miss watching her shine in front of all Harlot's Bay for anything. Even his own sanity. "Thank you, Dr. Itchybutt." Ms. Mortensen smirked at him, then rose from her chair. He grinned back.
"My pleasure."
"Mom!" Felicity complained loudly in the hallway as her mother rejoined her. "I told you to stop calling him that. It's embarrassing." Ms. Mortensen's voice faded into the distance as she spoke. "I'm so sorry, sweetie, but I'm your mom. Embarrassing you is my job. It's also my hobby." Matthew laughed quietly to himself, did his charting, and prepared to leave for the day. Since it was a Saturday, he intended to arrive at Bluestocking before his wife's lunch break. He'd already called the tea room, and they had little triangular sandwiches and flour-like potato tarts waiting in to-go containers for him, along with some of Carl's mini scones. Right before he turned out his office light, he glanced back at his desk and the dozen or so framed photos he'd carefully arranged there. "Baby, why do you have 30 bajillion pictures of me cluttering your workspace?" Athena asked almost every time she visited. "Don't they trip your Mr. Clean trigger?" No. When it came to her, mess didn't bother him. And as far as he was concerned, the more pictures of her he had, the better. His favorite photo hung beside the door. The two of them with their arms wrapped around each other, sunburned and wind-tossed and beaming, a Pacific sunset behind them, and white sails flapping above. As a wedding surprise, she'd found a company in Hawaii offering sailing experiences aboard a tall ship, and booked a slot during their honeymoon, all so he could live out his boyhood dreams of traversing blue, blue waters atop sun-baked wooden decks.
Other than the day Athena married him, that was the best day of his life so far. He pressed his forefinger to his lips and gently tapped it against the glass, covering her lovely, glowing face. Then, ritual completed, he put on his coat and left. A gusting wind greeted him outside, and gray-edged clouds had begun to gather on the horizon. There was a chance of thunderstorms. He'd seen when checking the forecast that morning. No surprise, really. It had been unusually warm all week, and the heat had to break somehow, ushering them back into autumn. He quickened his pace as he walked to the tea room, then the bookstore. The bell jangled on the door handle when he entered Bluestocking. An older male customer was showing Athena a book at the front counter, but she'd glanced up to see who'd arrived. As soon as she spotted Matthew, her lips curved in a small, sweet, private smile. And when he held up the distinctive tea room to-go bag, that smile turned blinding. She held up a finger, requesting patience, and he nodded. After spending a couple of years at historic Harlot's Bay, she'd found herself in need of another challenge, and by that point, Hill was desperate for a real break. So he'd hired her as the store manager, banking on her ability to increase his revenue enough that he could afford her salary. With her usual all-in enthusiasm, she'd overhauled the place with the help of Hill, Matthew, Johnny, and their friends. It was clean and bright now, the shelves sturdy and filled with shiny paperbacks, neatly arranged in alphabetical order within genres. Clear signage informed everyone where to find what they needed. In the back, she'd created an area for book club meetings and author events, and the nasty wenches met there monthly. A plate of free cookies, Carl's cookies, sat on the counter because Athena believed very strongly in the power of compliance strategies. The cookies were delicious, but they were also her bid to harness norms of reciprocity. A cart filled with overstocked books stood near the front counter, topped with a pretty sign telling customers the price, 4 for $1. The foot-in-the-door phenomenon in action. Nothing in her past was wasted. Her time teaching guided her business practices. Her tour guide experience helped her talk to anyone and everyone. Her work at the library gave her the necessary familiarity with authors and specific books. Her short stint at the bakery and friendship with Carl meant she could convince him to supply the bookstore's treats for free. Because, as she'd argued, once people tasted his baked goods, they'd want more. Begrudgingly, Carl had admitted to a significant increase in sales after Athena reopened Bluestocking. His lips had even twitched into a half-smile during the confession, at least until he'd noticed Matthew watching him. Then he'd scowled and told Matthew and Athena to get out of his fucking work area before he threw them in the fucking mixer and served them as the featured fucking muffin of the day. That big faker. He'd throw himself in the mixer before harming a hair on Athena's head. She had other plans for Bluestocking in the works, too. And she had a standing option to buy the store from Hill. If she decided she wanted to do that, Matthew would support her. If the store went under, Matthew would support her. If she got bored or overwhelmed and needed to find a different job, Matthew would support her. Simple as that. Watching Athena tackle new challenges was one of the true pleasures of his life. Despite her therapy and her meds, sometimes she still struggled with depression, especially in the winter and when she was restless or uncertain. Sometimes she was still harsher with herself than Matthew would wish, and it hurt to watch her suffer. It hurt to know he couldn't fix everything for her, as he longed to do. But it was a privilege to offer her a steady hand and stand by her side as she inevitably righted her ship. She handed the 60-something customer at the counter a free bookmark. If you'd rather revisit something you already own, no problem. This will help you mark your place in whatever you decide to read next. The man looked torn for a moment. Then he pushed the book they'd been discussing toward the cash register.
What the hey? Never hurts to try something new, right?
Yes. Norms of Reciprocity, Part 2. I think you're going to love the story, but if you don't and you treat the book gently, you can always bring it back for a quarter of the cover price in store credit. She reminded the man cheerfully as she took his money. Easy peasy Louis L'Amour squeezy. The man left the store smiling, the bookmark tucked inside the Western he'd bought. Matthew locked the door behind him and flipped the sign that informed customers of Athena's hour-long lunch break. By the time he turned back to her, she was already around the counter and ready to throw herself in his arms. With a surprised grunt, he staggered back a little, then caught his balance, wrapped himself around her, and tugged her even closer. "Hey, baby." She planted a kiss on his neck. "Can you possibly give me 5 more minutes? I need to call a few customers before it gets too late in the day for them to stop by." She cast a longing glance at the bag by his feet. "Will the food be okay?"
Yes, but before you do anything else.
Tipping up her chin with a nudge of his thumb, he covered her mouth with his and reveled in the warm give of her lips, the sweet slickness of her tongue. Afterward, he rested his forehead against hers.
Now I'm good. Take your time, sweetheart.
Just then, the first peal of thunder boomed in the distance, and he jerked in her arms. "Come on, Dr. Vine." Her embrace became less about cuddling and more about steering. "The back of the store awaits you." The children's nook at the rear of Bluestocking was surrounded on 3 sides by shelving. Anyone sitting in the brightly cushioned rocking chair there could see very little of the remaining store and nothing at all of the front windows. Athena guided him into that chair as another rumble of thunder jangled his nerves, then darted off somewhere. Moments later, she reappeared at his side and laid noise-canceling headphones on a nearby wooden table. "Remember to actually turn on the noise-canceling bit this time, okay?" She tapped a ragged fingernail against the headphone's tiny toggle switch. "While I'm up front, do you want to start the next book in the O'Brien series?" When he nodded gratefully, she went to grab the paperback from behind the counter. He slipped on the headphones and activated the noise-canceling feature. After thinking for a moment, he scooted his chair slightly to the side. An inch more. A different angle. And there. He could see the part of the counter where she usually stood, but not the front windows. Perfect. A moment later, she was dropping his book on the table, planting a kiss on his hair and ruffling his curls before heading back to the store phone. Idly, he took out his own phone because he was pretty certain he'd felt it vibrate earlier. Sure enough, he had missed a FaceTime call from Athena's parents. Most likely, they wanted to badger him into judging who had created the better watercolor during their latest art class. Those two were hyper-competitive about everything. Everything. After the wedding, they'd quickly elbowed their way into his life and Johnny's life, too. A couple of semi-retired steamrollers with way too much time and money on their hands. So now the Vine brothers kind of had parents again, for better or worse. Mostly better. They gave really excellent Christmas gifts, cashmere sweaters, and even better hugs. He texted them,
"I'll call later this afternoon. Sorry, it was my Saturday to work."
"No worries,"
came the near immediate response.
"Our pièces de résistance aren't going anywhere and can await your judgment indefinitely. Be good, kiddo."
Doug insisted on calling him kiddo, and Matthew should probably hate that. He didn't, though, at all. Johnny had evidently texted earlier as well, checking whether Matthew wanted to meet at the Halloween celebration.
"I know scary shit is your fave, bro, so let's hang out while Athena's doing her thing and can't babysit you. I'll even buy you a candy apple."
"Will you protect me from the murder dolls?" Matthew wrote back.
"Dude, if those creepy-ass dolls decide your time has come, there's no escaping them."
That didn't help me feel better at all, bro.
"Really? My bad."
Matthew shook his head with a sigh. Responsible adulthood and a fancy new workplace hadn't curbed that smart-ass streak of Johnny's. His brother was incorrigible. Still, he couldn't have been more supportive of Matthew and Athena. especially under the circumstances. Since they'd gotten married so quickly, Johnny hadn't yet left Strumpet Square Pediatrics for his fellowship program, and he'd voluntarily covered the lion's share of Matthew's work duties during the honeymoon. At the courthouse wedding, he'd even served as one of the witnesses. Both brothers had cried during the ceremony, especially during the ring exchange. And if one or two of Johnny's tears hadn't stemmed entirely from joy, he'd managed to fake it very convincingly.
Love you,
Matthew texted. Seconds later, the reply came.
Love you too. See you tonight, Brosephine.
When he looked up from his phone again, a cookie had magically appeared on the table beside him. Clearly the work of the world's most adorable witch. So before he rejoined Aubrey and Maturine on their various shipboard adventures, he rose from the rocking chair and braved the front of the store, despite the blue-tinged flashes flickering in his peripheral vision. Athena was still on the phone, talking with a customer. He shouldn't interrupt her, he knew that, but he really, really wanted a kiss. And these days he'd grown remarkably used to getting what he wanted. Spoiled, you might call him. But since that was his wife's fault, she'd have to suffer the consequences. Just like a brat, he rounded the counter and cut her off mid-word with a kiss of abounding, towering devotion, of gratitude for how fiercely she loved him, of awe at how very brightly she shone in his personal sky day after day. And just like a brat, he winked as he walked away and left her breathless. This is Joy Nash. We hope you've enjoyed this unabridged production of At First Bite, a Harlot's Bay novel by Olivia Dade. Presented by William Morrow and Harper Audio. This program was produced by John Marshall Media. Executive producer Abigail Marks. Text copyright 2024 by Olivia Dade. Production copyright 2024 by HarperCollins Publishers. All rights reserved. Thank you for listening.